Welcome back, listener. We're so glad to be here with you. Today, we're going to be talking about character development. And Stephanie has used this aspect of character coffee chats. And I know we referenced this at a previous podcast, one of our early ones, and we didn't go into any detail at that point. But today, we're going to talk a lot about character development. First, in fiction writing, which is what the coffee chats is centered around. And then I'm going to add some stuff that I have used for character development for memoir within my memoir course. So I hope you'll enjoy this conversation today about character development and how to get inside the head of either a fictional character or kind of assess your own values, beliefs, experiences that brought you to the particular mindset in which you're writing your memoir from. So Stephanie, kick it off for us. I know that you use this exercise of what you call the character coffee chats in order to get into the minds initially of your characters. And I know they've taken a little left turn here and there, but this we're talking today about like that initial process. What does that look like for you? How do you do that? And what do you get out of it?
Yeah, so I love thinking about it as a coffee chat because, of course, listener, if you've been listening for a while, you know that I love coffee. I love going to coffee houses to work. Anything that's around coffee, I'm there. And so I like framing it as a coffee chat. And I'm pretty sure this came about in a discussion with my book coach and in early stages of the development of my book. And I just grabbed onto this idea because it's really that idea of thinking about what it's like to get to know somebody. And oftentimes, when you meet somebody or you're getting to know someone, I mean, it's fun to get together and go to coffee. And even with a longtime friend, maybe some of you haven't seen in a while, it's fun to go and get some coffee. So I like to think about it in that way because then I feel like I can really relax myself and not feel like, okay, this has to be a very formal process. It's very much in the style of almost pantser, or some call it discovery writing, where you think about your character, you pose a question, and then you just essentially write down the first thing that comes to mind. So you might, say like, well, what did you do today? Just something simple, like just something you would ask someone, like, how's your day going? Or, what are things that you like? What do you dislike? You can get even as detailed as like, hey, like, what's in your refrigerator? And, and those are things that can begin to develop really more depthful ideas about who your character is. Um, and, certainly there are lots of resources out there. As a piece to accompany this episode, I'm going to actually put together my list of questions that I have that are scattered throughout my notes right now because I haven't really put it together formally. But to have that available as a PDF download for you to find and reference. Um, and, and of course, you'll probably come up with more of your own depending upon your genre, certainly specific genres. But I mean, when I think about, my romance characters, it's like even questions like, have you ever been in love? What was that like? Or, you know, what was your first date, first kiss? Um,
What's
and
your
just,
parents' relationship like? What relationship role models did you have in your life? Yeah.
yeah, you can really, you can really start to go, in depth and layer your questions. And it can be really fun because it's a very stream of consciousness process to see what comes up. And you're just imagining that you're having a conversation, like you're sitting in a coffee house. And sometimes this is actually proven more effective for me when I'm actually sitting at a coffee shop, just because I'm surrounded by conversation and I can really get that sense of the energy of the place. It's really up to you, but it I didn't think that it would be so as much fun as it is, but it's just a fun exercise to get more depthful about your character as opposed to saying like, okay, I'm going to have a main character who's, a woman in her 30s who's never had children, who's a workaholic. Like, I mean, okay, that gives you something, but it doesn't tell you, like, you know, what kind of brands does she like to shop for? Where does she like to shop? Why does she like to shop there? What does that say about her that she's picking certain clothes or wearing certain clothes? And, you know, what the kind of, why did she pick the dog that she has? And wh- what does that tell you about her? And where does she like to go to eat? And I mean, all of those layers that, of course, when you know the people in your life really well, they have a depth to them. You have an understanding about them that other people don't know about. And so it gives you a lot more that you can bring in to your story.
It's so interesting because this is exactly the point I made with like memoir writing. My sister was taking the last round of the course. And so I made the point that even though she and I grew up in the same household and have similar upbringing, when you look at all those kind of objective measures, we went to the same high school, middle school, all of that, and grew up in a similar environment. It's like there are going to be a number of things in which her worldview is different than my worldview, or that we've come to different conclusions on things, even from the same experiences. We could talk about, a childhood experience, maybe like a, big road trip we took, or any sort of like shared experience we had. And we could have like a totally different takeaway from that. So it is super unique, and you've got to figure out what that is about your character. If you're talking about in a fictional sense or in a memoir, that's what makes every memoir different. That's what makes your voice unique. Like, yes, you could be going through the similar situations. You could have a similar kind of plot line, right? Of like, oh, yeah, I'm talking about my divorce, or I'm talking about the birth of my first child. But you're going to have a different takeaway because of your beliefs, because of your experiences, because of your dreams and wishes and values than someone else who's going through that same experience. And that's what makes it engaging and interesting. And, you jump into someone's story in the middle. A lot of times with memoir, we're not starting at the beginning. We're starting somewhere in the middle where the person that we're writing about, our past version of ourselves, already comes into that moment with these beliefs. And, how trusting are they? How do they feel about relationships? Are they the kind of person that has, a big friend group or a very small friend group? And how do they view that? How do they maintain those relationships? Are they the kind of person that's good at maintaining long distance relationships, or are they not? And it's like the reader gets to jump in that, present moment wherever the story starts. But you also get to spark that curiosity of like, oh, wonder why they feel that way. And as you tell your story, you can sprinkle in a little bit more that gives some sort of indication about how you came to those conclusions, or what past experiences, impacted the way you view trust, or you value friendship, or you value the need to feel, connected in your community, or if you're okay, as long as your house is good, and the way that different people, view their world, and even what the depth of that, is your world like your immediate family? Is it your family and your community, or is it much more global than that? And that can really vary. And so I think it's such a good point to say that, like, as you're writing fiction, you got to think about those same sort of things in order to make that character feel more real. Because we all know, like, as I'm talking, you can hear me, you're thinking to yourself, oh, yeah, I think like this, I think like that. And so to create a fictional character who feels real, you need to go through those similar, like, thought exercises. And that's where I think the coffee chats are so valuable, because you're pretending like you're talking to a real person, and you're curious about all those things that may not come out in the story at all, but you as the writer need to know what perspective you're writing from. I love the concept of like what's in their refrigerator, because to me, it's like, is that the kind of person that, always make sure they have what they need? Do they go shopping and only buy immediately what they need? Like all that's in their fridge, on grocery shopping day is just a couple of condiments and, you know, half a gallon of almost spoiled milk. Like, there's so much that you could like draw from those various aspects and to think about what that like how that person even operates just by what's in their fridge. Is it full of leftovers? Is it, the half eaten that they, keep pushing to the back of the fridge? Is there a certain sort of like eating style? Are they vegan, vegetarian? Are they being super healthy with their eating? Or are they so busy that it's all the frozen foods and the quick meals because they don't have time
Mhm.
and that's what they value. They value their time going into their work versus their food prep. Do they go out to eat all the time? And so it's all takeout boxes and like the one packet of like ketchup. Like there's so much that could like aid in your understanding of a fictional character by just even looking at that singular concept, and I think that's so genius.
Well, I love it too, and I mean, I'm laughing because as you're talking, I was just thinking, in my head about, like, even when you watch movies or TV shows, and you probably don't even, like, think that you notice this, but oftentimes and I often see it happen in, like, romantic comedies especially, where there's oftentimes a scene around, like, someone opening the refrigerator. There's sort of that stereotypical, like, bachelor pad
With the
refrigerator
pantry,
where it's
right? Yeah.
yeah, yeah, or the pantry or something, where it's like where it's just like bottles of beer in a takeout container or something, and for like the bachelor stereotype or, or like the maybe there's, female character where she has everything like very, organized and labeled or, different ways that people organize their refrigerators. And so it is a fun one. And as I say, like I was thinking too how when you were talking about memoir, about the uniqueness of voice, that carries over so well too into fiction writing, is that the character that you're creating is, even though there may be, elements, like I said at the beginning, a woman in her 30s who's a workaholic, like you can find a lot of characters in books like that. But what is unique about the one that you're writing? And that's the key. That's where you bring your own life experience, because there's no way as a writer, and I mean, I've listened to lots of writers talk that in some way your own life experience, especially with fiction, is feeding it. And of course, memoir, it's full on your life experience and you're sharing your story. And that's the beauty of it, is bringing that voice in there, because that's what you want your reader to connect with and to be thinking about, what kind of character do I want my readers to connect with? And I was thinking about this too, because, and I've mentioned this in previous episodes, but, a book club that I was going to for a while in Columbia, Missouri called the New Romantics Book Club, that was for reading romance books. And there were often discussions around the books that talked about wanting more depth of character, that sometimes a book fell flat because they didn't feel like there was enough depth to the character. And so that's why I love, using this strategy of the coffee chat, is because it, as we are discussing now, I mean, it just adds to that depth. You can add the detail. And I would not recommend trying to do this all in one sitting. I mean, I would recommend, doing a little bit at a time, because you'll exhaust yourself and you'll find yourself sort of losing, your focus. At least that's happened for me, where I sort of feel like, okay, I need to stop because I think I have enough for what I need right now for where I am, especially like, okay, at the beginning of the book, there's some things I need to know, like, about like where my character lives and what their habits are and little things like that. And then things can change over time because of course, with like a meet cute and what are some quirks that my character has, or, you know, and who is this other character that she's meeting? Okay, now I have to do another character coffee chat. So certainly don't try to do it all at once, and I do it alongside my writing. And of course, I mean, everybody can have their own strategy. If you want to do your character coffee chats and have it like nailed down before you start, like that's great too. You have to figure out what process works for you. Um, but since I was so ready to jump into the story, uh, I just do it alongside. And so as I come to scenes, much like you think about like everyday life, I mean, you don't know from day to day what you're going to encounter or what's going to happen. And so it's that discovery idea of, okay, well, what next? All right. So the character is faced with, you know, a a challenge of some kind or an obstacle. Well, how do they handle that? Do they shrink away from confrontation? Do they avoid it? They don't want to have that conversation? Or are they someone who's just like, I'm in this, I'm gonna have this conversation, I'm gonna say what's on my mind, and they're gonna speak their mind. So, those are the pieces that then you're like, you sit down and you say to your character, okay, so, how are you gonna handle, this person who is, giving you a really hard time? Or how are you gonna handle this family member who, you feel like is gonna reject you if you make this choice? Like, how are you gonna handle that? And then, you kind of stream of consciousness respond, like, maybe they're okay with talking it out with the family member, or maybe they, you know, slink away into the corner because, they wanna make this choice. They don't wanna make the family member mad, but and so you're sort of playing around with those different ideas, and it helps you, and I really think it helps too with developing, dialogue, and I know we're not, like, going deep into that, but I feel like it helps you have a sense of, like, what would the character then say? Because if you're doing it as a chat and a coffee chat, it's very casual, and so you're writing down from their point of view, first person point of view is how you're writing it down, like, your character saying like, "I would do this." So then you right there, you already have a whole bank of their words essentially. Sure, they're coming from your head, but I mean, there is kind of this point in fiction writing where the character takes over and feel like you're like, "Wait, what? Wait, where are we going?" But that also makes it fun in that, and that's why it's a discovery process, is you're discovering, you don't know all the answers up front.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things we kind of pinpointed in our critique of Just for the Summer, which was our book club book from last month in regards to Justin. Because, like, as you're describing, you're like theorizing all these potential questions. Like, I really can't come up with too many answers in regards to his character. Like, what would he do in that situation? What is he like? Like, yeah, I get that he's like a doting older brother. You definitely get that as far as like a value system around like family and being dependable and all of that. But it's like, where's the nuance? Where's the depth? And not to say that, Abby didn't necessarily do that thought process, but just as far as it showing up in the actual writing, you and I both felt like his character was very like cookie cutter surface. And then there was some weird like stuff that seemed to go against the character that we had been presented in the, first, three quarters of the book without any justification for why there was this sudden apparent like flippant response to something where he had been, very empathetic and all in up until that point. So even for just like continuity of the character too, I think this exercise can be really, really helpful. No, I totally get the aspect of this coming kind of early or in conjunction with your early writing. That makes a lot of sense. When I do the memoir course, I actually put it a little bit later. And I only get to be able to do that because we're writing about ourselves. So there's, way more structure about, the character. You can't like invent, who you are. So it's not as important for figuring out like those key plot points or the core message or whatever, because those are what they are. They're confined by your life experience. But it is a really important exercise for going through and then integrating that character development into your storyline. Because what we want to see, whether we're reading fiction or memoir, is we want to see this character evolve, right? So we have like a certain point that we're starting from and the beliefs that they have or whatnot. And at least in memoir, there's like a core misbelief, right? Like there's something that you start out with in the beginning that you think, you know, you need to do everything alone, for example, and then you learn that you can depend on other people and that community is important or whatever the misbelief is. But you have to show that to the reader along the way. And a lot of what I use for character development for memoir comes from Lisa Cron's Story Genius. And she uses these scene cards, which you can Google scene card Story Genius and you can pull this up. But this is basically a 2 by 2 grid. You've got your act and scene number, your like main plot point. You can include subplots on this, which I think is super helpful for when you're going to integrate in subplots. And then basically it's cause and effect for both the plot and the story. So cause of the plot, effect of the plot, cause of the story, effect of the story. And the story piece is that internal kind of character development. And so what I found so helpful about this when I was doing a updated outline of my memoir, I found some gaps and holes by going through this process. And it encourages you to make sure that you're showing how the character is either reinforcing their old beliefs or starting to move towards new beliefs, questioning beliefs, um, and making those developments and those, I guess, improvements um, in their own confidence or their value of self or how they relate to others, their trust in the world, all those sorts of things. And so, what I love about using this for that outlining process and some of that early planning of your story is that it builds in that character development with it. So it's not just a static, like, who's your character at the beginning of the book, but also encourages you as the writer to think about, okay, if this plot point's going to happen, how is this going to change or impact how this character feels? So you brought up the, concept of maybe the character's presented with some kind of option, but if they take it, they know that their family is going to be unsupportive. So there's a lot that's going on internally with that character, inside their mind, inside their body in that process. And so it's important to like map that out along with the plot point so that you can then show whether that's through dialogue or through prose describing, their visceral reactions in the moment. So you can clue the reader into whether this is like pushing against their beliefs or they're leaning into their beliefs or, however this might affect the character to then take them into the next scene and make them just a little bit different, progressing that kind of storyline forward, not just through plot, but also through character development.
Well, yeah, and you bring up a really good point about remembering that there is that important aspect of character development of creating the character arc, that your character does go through some kind of transformation, some kind of change over the course of the the book, because that's, of course, what a reader going into it is going to expect. It's like, "Okay, the character starts here, now where are they going and why should I care?" And it's the same as you've discussed in memoir, because certainly you're starting at one point in your life, and over the course of time, there is a change that happens. I mean, that's, of course, one of the pieces when people, go and pick up a memoir, and I know with memoirs that I've read, you're expecting something, to shift for the person who's writing it, and oftentimes there's a lesson learned or something that you as the reader can then apply to your own life, and I think that the same applies in fiction, is that, the character is in some, whether it's a, internal struggle, external struggle, there's something. I mean, as we talked about, the hero's journey, all the different, save the cat, all the different ways that you can plot out your book, there's gonna be something where there's a change. And that's why I really like, as I say, doing my coffee chats as I'm going along with the book, because I don't always know, I mean, or I haven't in my process right now. I mean, I haven't known what the change is gonna be. And of course, my own storyline has shifted and changed a lot, and I think I shared that I finally like plotted out the whole book now, so I have an idea of where it's going, but I still don't have all the answers to questions that I have for my character of like, okay, well, now how are you gonna, you know, how is my main character gonna talk to her dad when she has to tell him that she doesn't really wanna be the one going through this process of him trying to buy the ski area because she's fallen in love with one of the owners, and so, all of those pieces, and so those are still to come as part of the character coffee chats, and as I say, like, I love, I mean, just in my mind, it makes it feel more relaxed, more calm, like, less of a, like, "Oh my goodness, this is, like, has to be so perfected." It doesn't at all. As I say, I mean, it's very similar to, the process I do when I'm doing, morning pages, inspired by, Julia Cameron's process of where it's just pure stream of consciousness, 3 pages. It's like, "Okay, here's a list of questions, and I'm just gonna write." And I'm also one who prefers to handwrite because I feel like that brings a more authentic response because there's that connection between hand, head, and heart that I feel comes with handwriting, that isn't quite there in the same way when you're sitting down to type. So, that's how I like to approach that process.
Yeah, and I think too with the coffee chats, it takes the character development piece from a just a very intellectual place to a much more just personable, like real place, right? You're not intellectualizing what this character is like. And in doing so, you're creating what I think are just more life-like fictional characters. And it makes total sense that you would have to do that, periodically as you're writing, just like you would, meet up for a friend at the coffee shop. And one week they're feeling this way, and the next week they're feeling this way, and life keeps happening. And a month later, now they give this response. Like that makes perfect sense to me that when creating a fictional character, you would need to have that same sort of approach. Like, hey, it's been a while since we connected. What's going on in your life now? Where are you at now? So, like, I don't know, at key points, maybe, in your story or after, you know, some of those like major times of like conflict and maybe act transitions or, act three breakups or whatever. Like, it's time to then meet again with the character and be like, how are you doing right now? Like, how are you feeling now? Like, did you suddenly decide to stock your fridge with vegetables? Like, what's going on?
Right. Or are there pints of ice cream? Like, what's the mood?
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm so glad that you're gonna be, condensing some of those, questions that you have felt to be really helpful for your character coffee chats and being, and sharing those. How do you want people to get those?
So the link will be in there'll be a link in the description, for those, and then it'll also, go out in the weekly newsletter when this episode airs, and so that's how you can, get the download, and of course, if you're already on our newsletter list, awesome, thank you for subscribing, we love that you're following along with us every week. And if you're not, we encourage you. There's also a link in the description to subscribe so that you don't miss out on having these resources go right to your inbox without having to search for it yourself. It's definitely more convenient for all of us when information appears in our email inbox. So, listener, thank you for joining us. And I hope that you'll start having some coffee chats with your characters. And if you do, we'd love to hear about it. So comment, email us, connect with us, and we'll talk to you next time.
Happy writing.